Hello and welcome to the Daily Seeds of Flourishing. So today I'm going to be talking about a British documentary series from originally from 1978 called Connections. And this was presented by science historian James Burke. Growing up, it was probably my favourite documentary series, and this sort of bounced into my head today when I was thinking about TV series in the UK that sort of contributed to my educational flourishing and enriched my learning. And then something curious happened. So I was due to go out for a walk, but it's raining hard today. So I decided to exercise indoors. But while I was exercising, I was able to rewatch the first episode of this series. So in its original iteration in 1978, there were 10 episodes. My favourite episode was probably this one, which was one called Countdown, but I rewatched the first one because I wanted to just reacquaint myself with what the show was about in totality. And what was interesting was in this episode, it was specifically about our dependence on complex technology. And there was a detailed narrative of the New York City blackout of 1965. And then the episode went on to look at, through going back in the discussion around this narrative, it then went forward from the historical point of the development of agricultural technology. And as I'm watching this through the lens of flourishing, the first half of the episode is pretty dark because it's looking at systems failure. But then, watching this episode through now, compared to, say, watching it through 1978, when I would have been 14 at the time, I think. I imagine I had a completely different takeaway. So in 1978, I would have been looking at it and greatly inspired by the technological discussions. Now looking back through, I started to think how our flourishing, both micro and macro, if you like, is greatly affected by the nature of that flourishing. And I was thinking about, I could probably divide flourishing into three things. So what might be referred to as independent flourishing, what might be referred to as dependent flourishing, and what might be termed interdependent flourishing. And how, by looking at those different types, if you like, of flourishing, what are the implications of that against the current or whatever situation you find yourself in. So it was interesting. I was taking a bit more of a philosophical viewpoint in rewatching this episode, which I hadn't watched probably since 1978. Of course, the nice thing with this is you can go and rewatch these episodes on YouTube. So again, here I'm going to include links in the description to the Wikipedia article and to the first episode, and from there on YouTube you should be able to find the other episodes. in the end there were actually 3 series, although you can see here there's a big gap between series 2 and series 3. Now, going back to just the general format of the show, the original show. So what Connections did was it explored an alternative view of change, and that was actually subtitled on the title headers at the start of the program, at the top of the show. So an alternative view of change that rejects the conventional linear and teleological view of historical progress. And Burke in the episodes contends that one cannot consider the development of any particular piece of the modern world in isolation. Rather, the entire gestalt of the modern world is a result of a web of interconnected events, each one consisting of a person or group acting for reasons of their own motivations, so profit, curiosity, religion, whatever, with no concept of the final modern result to which the actions of either of them or their contemporaries would lead. And then the interplay of the results of these isolated events is what drives history and innovation, and is also the main focus of the series and in its sequels. But of course, when I re-watched it, I started to think about the dependency of technology and how that has implications for flourishing. So it was interesting to do that. I would definitely recommend watching this series because it's interesting watching it through a modern lens, and because of the historical discussions that go on, it's aged really well, I feel. Now, there was also something which I should see if I can track down on YouTube. This is one I wasn't aware of, which is something called The Day the Universe Changed, a personal view by James Burke. And the series is on the effect of advances in science and technology on Western society and its philosophical aspects. So, yeah, that's interesting that, I've only just discovered this now, and yeah, that was a vibe I was getting off of re-watching Connections. Now I'm a lot older, is I did take a bit more of a philosophical viewpoint rather than more of a science technology viewpoint. When I was 14. So I include links to both of these, and I'll include a link to the first episode of this. Now, one other thing, and this really brings up something important from the first episode. So the first episode very much is about systems failure as well. And interestingly, in the 90s into the 2000s, I actually went on, as my career developed, to actually teach management information systems and systems and information management to undergraduate and postgraduate students over the course of, I would say, about 6 years maybe. And an element of that was discussing systems failures. And so there was a go-to book that I used to use for systems failures, which was this one, Understanding Systems Failures. It's a pretty old book, but again, the concepts that are discussed in it have modern equivalency, so very useful. It is possible to track down an extract of this on within Google Books here, and in the Google Books thing, I think it covers the first 70 pages of the book, which is sufficient for them to discover discuss the 3 Mile Island incident. Now, I don't believe 3 Mile Island was ever discussed in Connections, or I don't believe any of these were discussed specifically in the series, but it was interesting that the first episode in the series was about a systems failure in connection to the power blackout of 1965 in New York City. So definitely, if like me, you have an interest in systems failure, or have had to pursue aspects of systems failure. Mine is mainly within the sphere of IT, but obviously, there's other areas where that's important, and also in engineering generally. Then, very interesting rabbit hole to go down. This was a compulsory book. I think how I became aware of it on the there was a Open University course which isn't run anymore, from way back, which was all about systems generally, and this was one of the course books. It looked at wider aspects of systems beyond systems failure, and it was really as a consequence of discovering that course that was available. Although I never did it, I did track down the book. I have a copy of this, slightly different cover to it, and also I got very interested in soft systems methodology as well. So so interesting how those things flowed out of here, of Connections originally over time, and also going back and reappraising it. So hopefully you've enjoyed this episode of the Daily Seeds of Flourishing. Thanks for checking it out, and I will catch you in the next episode. Bye for now.